Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Ontario Regional Chief RoseAnne Archibald. Archibald became the first woman elected to the position in 2018. She's been politically involved for 30 years, when she became the first woman and the youngest chief elected as chief of her community in 1990. She is one of 3 female regional chiefs for the Assembly of First Nations. Regional Chief Archibald, thanks so much for being with us this week.
Thank you, Dennis. Good to be here.
Let's start with the recent Assembly of First Nations Annual General Assembly and the resolution that was calling for an investigative review of the AFN to end sexual orientation and gender-based discrimination. What led to this resolution needing to come forward?
Well, it certainly predated my arrival as a regional chief, and I think it's just long overdue. It was initiated from the Yukon region and the BC region. That's where there were similar, in BC there was a similar resolution passed on safety for women and equality for women and gender diverse people, and that became a template for the resolution that became a national resolution. But also the Yukon region has done a tremendous amount of work on this issue, and so that's the genesis of it. And I think that the work has been a long time coming, and I'm really looking forward to the process as it unfolds.
You spoke passionately about this resolution. Is this something that you've experienced personally?
Yeah, I mean, the very first thing that happened to me as a young leader, I was 23 at the time, and I had just been elected to my own council and was on council with other members who were male. I had no female members of council. And I found that at that time I was, I guess maybe I didn't have very thick skin at the time. I was, young and really eager to make changes. And I just found that in that first term that I had a lot of conflicts with my male council members, and certainly felt that part of that was because I was young, 23-year-old, and the second part was because I was a woman. And so I didn't finish that term because I just felt like, if that was going to be my life for 2 years of constantly butting heads with my council, that it wasn't going to be healthy for them and certainly wasn't going to be healthy for me.
How prevalent is this for women in First Nations leadership? We're seeing a lot more female chiefs. Is this something that you hear about a lot?
Yeah, I do. I hear from other chiefs and other regional leaders that they've had these kinds of incidences where they have felt not treated equitably by people that they've worked with. So it's definitely not a unique situation. It is happening at a rate that I would say is still too high in this day and age. We're in 2021, and we really need to have healthy spaces for women and safe spaces in order for them to exercise their leadership.
At the AGA, and the debate during this resolution, there was some pushback against it, including from one of the female chiefs. Why do you think that was?
Sorry, I keep adjusting my camera here because.
Yeah, sorry. During the debate on the resolution, there was some pushback against it, including from one of the female chiefs. So, why do you think there was that pushback against it?
Well, there was one person who had procedural kinds of issues that they wanted resolved, and I didn't think that was. I felt like the resolution was pretty clear as it was, and that we needed an actual investigative review, and that we didn't need a softer process. We need to look into these situations within the AFN in the past, the present, so that future women and girls can walk into the space and feel safe and feel valued for the leadership that they do bring.
You laid some of the blame for the pushback at the feet of National Chief Perry Bellegarde. How come?
Well, when these kinds of resolutions are debated, there's certainly behind the scenes work that's always happening. And that behind the scenes work is sometimes very innocuous. It's just, can you talk to a chief and get them to suggest a certain particular wording. But I felt like what I was seeing online was not just small tweaks. It was, in my view, an attempt to thwart the resolution. And I became very upset at that. And I did feel like the national chief is really responsible for the leadership of the organization, and I felt like he had to step forward and wholeheartedly support the resolution, which he did, and I'm very grateful for that.
The resolution did pass, of course, not unanimously. What happened or is happening now with originally there was a plan to have the report back in 6 months?
Yeah, it's the process is underway for the tri-councils to consider names for the investigative review panel. And I know that we're not a part of that. AFN Executive is not a part of that process. And I really look forward to seeing who those individuals will be. And, I'm not sure where they are in the process, but I think the Christmas break complicated things a little bit. But as far as I know, they're moving ahead.
You've said you received a negative email from a chief in BC shortly after speaking at the AFN. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I won't name the chief. It's just that, this chief lashed out and was not happy with the passing of that resolution. And I won't share the details of the email with you either. But it just, it was it was immediately within an hour that I received that email pushing back against the passing of the resolution.
I guess just further hammering home the need for such an investigation.
Yeah, there are many of my male counterparts who are supportive and who are standing with us, and I'm very grateful for that support. And I am also concerned about the odd and perhaps minority of male chiefs who aren't as supportive of that. But I can tell you that the majority of my chiefs in Ontario who reached out to me were very supportive of this process. And there were even a few national chiefs from across Canada who are also expressing support for the process. So I think that I don't want to focus on the negative in this case, that one email. I want to focus on the fact that we do need our brothers to stand with us. When I think about my career in politics, I've had a lot of brothers that have helped me and supported my leadership. And I call them brothers because I have 6 brothers in total myself. And I had 4 older brothers growing up. And those older brothers were really key in terms of protecting me as a young girl and looking out for me. And I sort of transfer that kind of energy and thought onto the brothers that I work with in different leadership capacities today. And I do certainly feel that we have a number of male leaders who are standing with us, and I encourage others to come forward and say it's time for us to deal with this and move forward and create safe spaces and make space for women.
Regional Chief, what are your hopes to come out of this investigation when it does wrap up?
Well, the investigative review really is about looking at the landscape in terms of what are the barriers for women, what are incidences that have occurred, and where have we fallen down in protecting women in positions of leadership, and making recommendations on particularly, I think the most important work is how the investigative review panel will make these kinds of recommendations on creating safe spaces for women. That's what's really needed. When a woman walks into an AFN executive meeting, she needs to feel welcome. She needs to feel like she can inhabit leadership in a way that's not necessarily how it's been inhabited in the past. Like it's, for example, when I was younger, I didn't really, I've been through 30 years of experiences. That's what I always say. Mm-hmm. And when I was younger, I kind of felt like, I wanted to fit in a little bit more and maybe be one of the guys. I was often the only woman in the room. But as I've gotten older, I realized that I needed to be genuinely myself and just to inhabit leadership from a heart-centered space, from a place of deep and abiding love and care. And for everybody, when a woman walks into a leadership council kind of meeting, then I just want her to feel like I can be myself. I can inhabit leadership in a way that's different from men and be accepted for that and be embraced for that.
Regional Chief, much more to talk about here. We've just got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Ontario Regional Chief RoseAnne Archibald. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Ontario Regional Chief RoseAnne Archibald. Chief Archibald, the Assembly of First Nations will be selecting a new national chief this summer, with current National Chief Perry Bellegarde announcing he will not be seeking re-election after 2 terms. Are you considering at all looking at running for national chief?
Well, I'm really excited to see that women are at the forefront of people's minds as we go into this election. And as you may know, Dennis, I have worked my whole career at promoting women in leadership. For example, when I was a Deputy Grand Chief at Anishinaabe Nation, we had a project that actually did leadership training and capacity building for women. So this is something that's really dear to my heart. In terms of my own future, I have a Chiefs meeting coming up, and I can't announce to the media before I talk to the 133 Chiefs in Ontario who elected me. I'm not sure if you're aware of how our elections happen in Ontario, but it's a traditional selection process where the Chiefs stand behind you, and at the end, all of the Chiefs in Ontario stand behind you. And so I really need to talk to them about my situation and what I'll be doing. I have an obligation to talk to them first, but as soon as I have some news, Dennis, I will share it with you.
Look forward to it. Women have in the past run for national chief, and given what we spoke about in the last segment, do you think the AFN could one day see a national chief that is a woman?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so this time around.
Okay. Regional Chief, the AFN has long been criticized as being out of touch with the grassroots and people at the community level. What do you say to people who say that?
There is a political structure in place that allows only chiefs to vote for the national chief position. And that, to me, is an issue that needs to be resolved over time. I don't know when that would happen, but certainly, for example, in my community, I get to vote for my chief, and therefore I get to have those conversations with my chief and council because I'm connected to them. I've essentially taken my vote, and we've all collectively handed that power off to our chiefs and councils, whereas the AFN is elected only by the chiefs of the communities. And so people will not feel necessarily that they can reach out to the national chief or the national executive in the same way. And I believe that has to be, at some point, corrected.
On that point, it has been pitched, given that chiefs and proxies are likely to vote for national chief this time around virtually, that maybe the grassroots could vote for a national chief as well. What are your thoughts on that proposal?
I believe that one day we will see that happen. And I don't know when that day will come, but I certainly one day would look forward to marking an X beside that kind of position, whether it's the Grand Chief of my territorial area, which we do actually. Mushkegowuk Council might be one of the only tribal council areas that actually where people can vote for the Grand Chief and the Deputy Grand Chief there. But I certainly would look forward to doing that at all levels and being a part of that process. I think that that's democracy and work, and we've got to get there.
As somebody who's been on the inside of the AFN for the last, almost 3 years, what do you say to those who contend that the AFN isn't relevant anymore?
I'm not sure if the word relevant is perhaps the best word to describe that out-of-touch feeling that people have with the AFN. I certainly feel that the decisions that are made within the structure that is the AFN is not a grassroots decision-making process. And I think everybody will acknowledge that. And I just believe we have to get there someday. We can't keep going in a process where there's that big disconnect between the people and the citizens that we are working for and thinking about in all our decisions, and them just not being connected to us through a proper democratic elected process.
And National Chief Bellegarde's big thing has been over these 2 years, closing the gap, making that gap smaller. And there has been record funding announced from the federal government. But what do you see as the big issues for the incoming National Chief, whoever that may be?
Well, the organization needs to be transformed. And I believe that Resolution 13, which just passed, is a part of that work. The organization must change. The organization must become healthier and better and more connected to the people that we serve. And so that is the work of the incoming National Chief, is to make sure that across Canada we are all connected and working together. I certainly feel like having a good strategic direction as an executive is key to that, and that's what I would want the new National Chief to come in and do.
Regional Chief, you're also part of a COVID vaccination team task force. We're going to talk about that for sure, but we do just need to step aside for another quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Ontario Regional Chief RoseAnne Archibald. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Ontario Regional Chief RoseAnne Archibald. And Regional Chief, last week you met with government officials to discuss the long-delayed national action plan on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Was there any indication on when the feds might release a plan?
Well, they are working with each of the regions, and I know that in Ontario, I can only really speak to our process in detail. Mm-hmm. We are beginning that process with the National Action Plan rollout in Ontario, and there are some meetings planned in the coming months. So it's rolling out in different ways across the country. I know BC had many engagements. The Yukon recently announced their MMIWG approach in terms of the action plan. So it's just rolling out at different rates across the country.
Are you concerned at the speed that things have been going with this?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we want things to move quickly and in a timely way. This is a long-standing issue, and we need resolution on it as quickly as possible. And when you're looking at the kind of approaches that vary from region to region, the rollout can take longer, and that's been frustrating for many people. But I want to, remind everyone that in Ontario and in other parts of the country, we are taking a families first approach. And those are people that are directly affected by MMIWG. And so, that kind of work you want to be thorough with, you want to be caring about. And I think that we have to get it right versus get it done fast. So if we go too quickly or don't get it done right, then I think we failed those families.
Regional Chief, as we mentioned, you're also a member of the Minister's COVID-19 Vaccine Distribution Task Force. How would you describe the current efforts for vaccination on First Nations?
Well, in Ontario, again, can only speak to our experience. I have been reading about rollout across the country, but as a member of the task force, it's the larger picture in Ontario that I'm a part of, and we are allowing room for learning about this kind of mass vaccination that is distinct in so many ways. And so, for example, the biggest problem we have in Ontario and everywhere in Canada is that we don't have enough vaccines. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to roll out a program when you don't have the actual vaccine to put in people's arms. And so that's been our biggest struggle in Ontario. But I do have some good news that long-term care homes in some of the major settings where they have recognized long-term care homes by the province, those elders have been vaccinated on the James Bay coast, north of Sioux Lookout, in Sioux Lookout, I should say. And also, I know that last week there was some rollout in Six Nations of the Grand River, in Oneida, and I believe coming up in Akwesasne, where they do have a long-term care home. So we're looking at an elders first approach because those are our most vulnerable. And so when you think about the Ontario process, it's long-term care homes and healthcare workers first, and First Nations as we roll out the vaccine. It's going to be the same priority areas. It's going to be our elders first, our healthcare workers, our most vulnerable. Those are going to be the priorities as we roll forward. But we are beginning that process in Ontario, and it is elders first right now.
Regional Chief, we only have about a minute left here, but as we know, there is hesitation among First Nations about getting the vaccine. I guess just briefly here, what's your message to try and alleviate those concerns?
Well, what I'm seeing in Ontario is because elders are going first and they are understanding that we need this vaccine to keep them safe so that they can see their families again, so that they can visit with their grandchildren. They understand the importance of the vaccines. And as you know, we're a society that holds up our elders. We lift them up. We look to them as our guides. And the fact that elders have such a high uptake on the vaccines, to me, is hopeful. So, for example, in Sioux Lookout, 44 out of the 47 residents in the William A. George long-term care facility there consented to being vaccinated. And so if they're going to lead the way with those kind of numbers, then I believe that over time, First Nations citizens in general will also have a high uptake on the numbers as we roll out the program and people see that it is indeed a safe vaccine.
Regional Chief, we'll have to leave it there as we're out of time, but thank you for joining us and looking forward to any coming announcements you may have. And
for sure. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. You can catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in to Face to Face. Have a great night. We'll see you back here next week.